Chapter 4 September 1951, Beijing. Part 2. Late in the afternoon, her exhausted legs strained to pedal her home. The house was a typical Beijing residence, a one-story wooden dwelling built around a rectangular courtyard. The beams, window sashes, and posts featured beautiful carvings painted in traditional red. The delicate perfume of blossoming magnolias in each corner wafted through the courtyard. Only Grandpa's frequent and loud cough from the left wing marred the peace. Grandma had tried often to take his cigarettes away, but he insisted he would rather die than live without tobacco. Zoe's mother, Lan Ying, was reading a newspaper in the lounge. She was small and delicate, like Zoe, her face always perfectly made up to show no trace of her age. The room, like the rest of the house, was tastefully decorated with traditional furniture. A vase of carnations stood on the big round table. Several famous ink paintings and poetic scrolls on the walls hinted at the family's wealth and social status. When Zoe staggered in, sad, fatigued, and utterly drained, Lan Ying started up from the chair. "Are you all right?" Zoe stood against the door quietly, with no expression on her face, like a pale paper cutout. Lan Ying glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 7 o'clock. She stood up and stared at Zoe with concern. "Did you go to church again? I have noticed that something is troubling you. I'm sure that God will give you guidance, but you can always tell your mother." She pressed a kiss on Zoe's forehead. "Are you hungry? I'll get Nanny to get dinner ready quickly." Zoe shook her head slowly, tears springing to her eyes. Unable to find the words, she flung her arms around her mother, dropped her head on her shoulder, and cried. For a while, Lan Ying said nothing and just patted her daughter's back soothingly. When Zoe's sobs finally lessened, she wiped the tears off her face. "Come, sit here with me. Zuyi, tell Mama, what's wrong?" Lan Ying was horrified when she heard her daughter's experience. "You should have told us sooner. Maybe we could help." Zoe sniffed. "I didn't think it was that serious. I thought I could handle it myself. I don't want you worrying about me." Lan Ying shook her head, her expression sympathetic. "Things can't be as bad as you think. I will go talk to Chief Ma tomorrow." "You don't understand," her lips trembled. "He hates me. He called me an enemy of China." No, you mustn't think that way. Chief Ma is just doing his duty. The government is getting more and more cautious now because the American president has threatened to drop a nuclear bomb on China. "But I've done nothing wrong. Why am I getting blamed?" Zoe cried and ran into her room. Exhausted both physically and emotionally, she dropped onto her bed and cried herself to sleep. A gentle voice nudged her back to consciousness. "Zuyi?" Lan Ying said, rapping gently on the door. "Zuyi, come out for dinner now." "I'm not hungry." Zoe turned the light on, went to the desk, and shoved the pile of newspapers onto the floor. She sat down, staring at John smiling in the photo, as memories and emotions welled up in her. From their first meeting at the tennis court to their last passionate kiss at the dock. He had recognized the danger and tried to warn her. He tried to stop her, but she had been too selfish to understand, and her stubbornness had ruined both their lives. She started sobbing again at the thought of what she had done. After a while, she pulled open the drawer and spread her letters on the desk, reading through each one in turn. John's love and humor shone through his neat writing, but did little to soothe her distress. She was still reading when Lan Ying walked into the room and put a tray of food on the desk. "Zuyi, I made your favorite, fried egg with tomato." "I'm not hungry," repeated Zoe, not looking up from John's letter. For a moment, Lang Ying stood quietly, watching her. She was worried about Zoe, but didn't know how to comfort her. I should never have come back. I should have listened to John, stayed in America, and married him, said Zoe as she put the last letter on the desk. I'd still have a career. I'd have John. I'd be happy. Maybe we shouldn't have asked you to come back. We didn't know China and America would get involved in the Korean War, and the relationship would get so bad, said Lan Ying, wringing her hands. I have to go back to America, as soon as possible. I promised John that I would marry him there. How? Lan Ying asked, squeezing Zoe's shoulder. It's impossible. You know transportation between the two countries is prohibited, and it would cause even more trouble for our family. Your dad and I might be labeled as traitors and lose our jobs. Zoe rested her chin in her hands, staring at the photo wordlessly. It had been taken on her 21st birthday. John sprawled comfortably on the grass, and she crouched behind him, her head resting against his, and her arms around his neck. They were smiling, happy as teenagers without a care. Her mother frowned at her continued silence. I know you like him, but the reality is, you can't marry him, now or ever. The government considers him a spy, and they have the letters as proof. If they find these letters and photos too, that will be the end of you. You'd better burn them all. No! Zoe picked up the photo and held it close, as if someone was waiting outside her room, ready to steal it. A man can stop loving a woman in a day and leave her without a word for the rest of his life. How many men will wait for a woman for years without any certainty for the future? He probably has a new girlfriend by now. I'm sure you'll find another suitable man soon. I only want him. Don't be foolish. Lan Ying's voice took on a slightly disapproving tone. You have to eat something now. Stop crying or you'll spoil your looks. Lan Ying patted Zoe's shoulder again, and then left without another word. For a long while, Zoe sat at the desk, utterly still, staring at the blank wall in front of her, her mind just as empty, until she realized her legs were going numb. She stood up and wandered to the dressing table, picking up a brush to comb her hair as she stared at her reflection on autopilot. She used to wear her hair curled over her shoulders, she thought idly, remembering how John loved to run his fingers through it. Now it hung straight down, a blunt cut that barely reached the bottom of her chin. John would be so disappointed. Her head throbbed, her eyes had no more tears to cry, and her body felt too weak to stand. Dropping the brush on the dresser, she changed into her pajamas, turned off the light, and lay staring in the darkness. It was nearly midnight, but sleep wouldn't come. Vaguely she heard her parents arguing in their bedroom. Her father, a mathematician and professor at Beijing University, was fuming. He roared, "It's crystal clear that she isn't an American spy or a counter-revolutionary. Not in a million years. Why on earth do they think a young scientist like her, with a bright future and promising career, would come back to China? Because this is her motherland. She loves this country." She could not hear what Lan Ying said in response, but could guess Mama would stay cool, trying to ease Father's temper. Mother was like that, calm and positive in the face of upheaval. Father was much more likely to lose his temper and be pessimistic, but he tended to have a better strategy overall. Bang! A noise startled her up from the bed. It sounded as though her father had slammed his fist onto the desk, and the thud echoed through the courtyard. Ridiculous! If anybody who's been to the US or had connections with Americans is so easily labeled an enemy, based just on a few letters, then I must be one too. And so are lots of intellectuals. "Are you crazy? Keep your voice down. The whole neighborhood can hear you. Don't you think we have enough troubles as it is?" Mother raised her voice. "I don't care. Let them come and get me," snapped Father. "Okay, tell me what you want to do." Mother had lost her patience. The silence stretched out. The house was so quiet that she could hear her own heart beating. But she imagined Baba standing still in front of a window, calming himself down. Suddenly, a gentle knock at the door broke the silence, and her father's voice sounded low. "Suyi, it's me. I just want to tell you that I'm so sorry for what has happened. It's my fault. I should never have written those letters asking you to come back." "No, Baba," cried Zoe, sitting up. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I didn't listen to John." She wanted to fling the door open and throw her arms around her father, but couldn't muster the energy to get out of bed. "Don't worry. We'll work something out. Have a good sleep now." Her father's footsteps faded as he walked back down the hallway. Zoe felt a wave of comfort and relief at Father's unconditional love and understanding. However, Mother's words still reverberated in her mind, pronouncing a death sentence on her relationship with John and bringing into sharp focus that vague sense of unease that had haunted her for months. She looked at the photo, still clutched in her hand, feeling empty. That was finished. She alone was to blame for ruining John's life by demanding her own way. People like her, who thought themselves infallible, should never be trusted. She was not worthy of his love. He should hate her. She put the photo aside and carefully wiped the tears off the ring, which she hadn't taken off since John put it on her finger. Through her blurred eyes, the shining garnet seemed to be John's face, smiling at her. Slowly, holding her breath, she slid the ring off her finger and put it inside a wooden box that sat on her dresser. It was barely dawn, but the chill air of the early spring morning woke her. She stretched her numb arms overhead, and like an electric shock jolting through her cold body, the fresh blood brought her back to brutal reality. She was an American spy's fiancée. She was prohibited from teaching. Each week she had to write a self-examination to criticize herself and her weaknesses. Fighting back a sob, she replayed her mother's words yet again. "You can't marry him, now or ever." Hiding her face in her hands for a moment, she took several deep breaths to steel her resolve. Mother was right. She had to get rid of the letters and photos. They would only provide more evidence for the government to use against her. She would never be able to see John again, let alone marry him. So what was the point of keeping them? Despite the ache that twisted her heart, she opened the lid of the small coal stove and methodically threw the letters onto the coals one by one. When the last one had crumbled to ash, with trembled fingers, she removed the photo from the frame. Her fingertips caressed the photo as if it were John's face. She kissed it one last time, and then put the photo in, watching through tears as it curled and crackled in the heat. She felt the flame burning away both her past and her future, leaving her hollow and empty. "Oh, no, please!" she cried, snatching the photo from the flames to save at least a remnant of the memory. She cradled the scorched paper in her fingers. John's face smiled up at her. It was all she had left of their love. Zoe went through the next few days and weeks in a fog, unaware of what went on around her. The hope that she might be understood was fading, and her yearning to be free and marry John evaporated into numbness. The only thing she could remember to do was hand in her self-criticism every Thursday afternoon. Late in September, she stood opposite Chief Ma's desk, still except for the twisting of her fingers, her head lowered in submission as she waited for him to finish reading her fourth paper. She searched his face for any clue that he was satisfied, but his stony features revealed nothing. "Comrade Meng," said Chief Ma, putting the paper on his desk and looking at her with his cold, emotionless eyes. "The party committee has discussed your issue, and we think generally you have recognized your problems, corrected your thinking, and put acceptable thoughts into action. So, your problem is no longer one of class struggle, but a fight to rid yourself of false opinions and cleanse your political consciousness. You will be allowed to teach again." "Really?" Her eyes opened wide in disbelief. She had thought this miserable situation would last months. As part of her self-confession, and to demonstrate her political will to make a clean break with her past, she had even turned in a few American magazines she had brought back to China. However, Chief Ma never seemed satisfied, each week asking her if she still had any other items from overseas. Clearly, he wasn't ready to trust her. Chief Ma nodded. However, he paused, looking into her brightened eyes, trying to gauge her inner thoughts. "That doesn't mean you can relax your vigilance and stop reforming your thoughts and actions. You must still regularly report to the party organization your ideology progress and problems once a month. You must hand in any correspondence from overseas in the future on your own initiative." Zoe nodded, relief tugging her lips into a grateful smile. "I will do whatever you ask, so long as you let me teach and continue my research."